I've been a deputy sheriff with the Riverside County Sheriff's Department for 12 years, and I thought I'd seen every kind of domestic situation you could imagine. Restraining order violations, harassment cases, stalking complaints, they all start to blur together after a while. But what happened on March 15, 2023, during a routine welfare check call, opened my eyes to just how far human jealousy and manipulation can go. What started as a simple wellness visit turned into one of the most disturbing cases of psychological manipulation I've ever encountered. It was around 2:30 in the afternoon when the call came in. I was patrolling the Fairview Heights neighborhood in my 2020 Ford Explorer Police Interceptor when dispatch crackled over the radio. Unit 23, we have a welfare check request at 847 Maple Avenue. Caller reports her friend hasn't been answering calls or texts for 3 days and missed work without calling in. The address led me to a modest 2-story house on a quiet residential street lined with oak trees. The neighborhood was the kind of place where people knew their neighbors and kept their lawns maintained, not typically where we got a lot of unusual calls. I pulled into the driveway behind a 2018 Honda Accord and noticed the curtains were drawn tight across every visible window. The woman who answered the door looked exhausted. Sarah Martinez, 29, worked as a nurse at Riverside Medical Center and lived alone. She was still in her scrubs from what appeared to be the previous day, and I could immediately tell something was seriously wrong. Her hands were shaking as she invited me inside, and she kept glancing nervously at the windows like she expected someone to be watching. "Thank you for coming, officer," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know who else to call. I think someone's been in my house." The living room was neat but showed signs of disturbance. Picture frames had been moved, books were out of place on the shelves, and there were muddy footprints on the hardwood floor that clearly didn't belong to Sarah. She was wearing clean white nursing shoes that matched the prints leading from the front door. "Can you tell me what's been happening?" I asked, pulling out my notepad. Sarah sat down heavily on her couch and wrapped her arms around herself. "It started about 2 weeks ago. Little things at first. I'd come home and find my kitchen cabinets open, or my bedroom window unlocked when I knew I'd locked it. Then I started finding these items." She led me to her kitchen table where several objects were arranged in what looked like a deliberate pattern. There were bundles of dried herbs tied with black ribbon, small bones that appeared to be from birds, stones painted with strange symbols, and several handwritten notes, covered in what looked like Latin phrases mixed with gibberish. "I kept finding these around my house," she continued. "In my mailbox, on my doorstep, sometimes inside when I came home from work. The notes always say things about being cursed, about how I've taken something that doesn't belong to me, and how I need to give it back or face consequences. I photographed the items and carefully bagged them as evidence." The handwriting on the notes was distinctive, neat cursive with elaborate flourishes. "Do you have any idea who might be doing this? Any recent conflicts with neighbors, coworkers, or former relationships?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, then said, "There's only one person I can think of, but it seems impossible. My friend Jessica Chin. We've been friends since college, and she's the one who called for the welfare check? She's been so supportive through all of this. Tell me about Jessica. We work together at the hospital. She's a lab technician. About 6 months ago, I got promoted to charge nurse for our department, a position Jessica had also applied for. She seemed fine about it, congratulated me, even threw me a little celebration party. But lately..." Sarah paused, looking uncomfortable. "Lately what?" "She's been asking a lot of questions about my personal life. Wanting to know my schedule, when I'm home, if I'm dating anyone. She offered to help me install a security system and insisted on having a spare key for emergencies. She's been the one pushing me to call in sick to work, saying I look too stressed and need time to recover from all this harassment." A pattern was starting to emerge that I'd seen before in manipulation cases. "Has Jessica been the one giving you advice about how to handle these incidents?" "Yes, actually. She's the one who suggested I not call the police at first. She said it might make whoever's doing this escalate their behavior. She recommended I try some spiritual cleansing methods first, burning sage, carrying protective stones. She even brought me some of the supplies. I felt a chill run down my spine. What kind of supplies? Sarah led me back to a cupboard in her kitchen and pulled out a box. Inside were bundles of dried herbs, small stones, and black ribbon, identical to the items we'd found arranged on her table. Jessica brought these to help protect me from the curse, she said. Then her face went pale as she realized what I was thinking. Oh my God! You don't think? I need to ask you some specific questions about your friendship with Jessica. How often does she contact you? Every day, multiple times. She texts me constantly asking how I'm feeling, if anything strange has happened, if I've found any more items. She insists on walking me to my car after work and has offered to stay overnight several times to keep me safe. And the promotion you mentioned, what exactly did it involve? Sarah explained that the charge nurse position came with a significant salary increase, better schedule flexibility, and the potential to eventually move into hospital administration. It was a career-defining opportunity that several people had competed for. Jessica took the news well, Sarah insisted. She said she was happy for me and that I deserved it. But as we continued talking, more concerning details emerged. Jessica had been documenting Sarah's increasing absence from work and had volunteered to cover her shifts. She'd suggested to their supervisor that Sarah might be having a mental health crisis and needed professional help. She'd even researched therapists and offered to drive Sarah to appointments. I need to examine your phone, I said. Specifically, I want to look at your communication history with Jessica. The text message thread was extensive and revealed a clear pattern. Jessica would send messages asking about Sarah's well-being, then follow up with increasingly urgent concern when Sarah took more than a few minutes to respond. Many of the messages contained leading questions designed to make Sarah more paranoid and isolated. But what really caught my attention was the timing. I had Sarah walk me through several incidents when she'd found items or noticed disturbances in her house. In every case, Jessica had contacted her within minutes of when Sarah would have discovered the evidence, always asking if everything was okay or if anything strange had happened. Sarah, I need you to think carefully. On the days when you found these curse items, did you tell Jessica about your work schedule or when you'd be home? She thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. Yes, we usually text about our schedules. She likes to coordinate our breaks and lunch times. I asked Sarah to show me where she'd found each item, and we walked through her house methodically. The pattern became clear. Every single incident had occurred on days when Jessica knew Sarah's exact schedule, and most happened during times when Jessica wasn't working or was on break. The final piece of evidence came when I examined the spare key situation. Sarah had given Jessica a key 6 weeks earlier, right around the time the incidents began. Jessica had insisted it was for safety, in case of emergencies. I need to be direct with you, I said. Based on the evidence and timeline, I believe Jessica is the one who's been terrorizing you. This appears to be a calculated campaign of harassment designed to make you think you're being stalked by a stranger, when in reality, your friend has been using her access to your house and knowledge of your schedule to plant evidence and create psychological distress. Sarah stared at me in shock. But why would she do this? She's been so supportive. The promotion, I explained. Sometimes when people don't get something they want, especially when someone close to them does, it can trigger extreme resentment. Jessica has been positioning herself as your protector and support system while simultaneously being the source of your trauma. It's a form of psychological manipulation called gaslighting, combined with what we call rescue behavior, creating a crisis so she can be the hero who saves you. The more we discussed it, the clearer the picture became. Jessica had been systematically isolating Sarah from work, making her appear unstable to their supervisors, and positioning herself as the indispensable friend who was trying to help. If Sarah had a mental breakdown or was forced to take extended leave, Jessica would be the obvious candidate to take over her responsibilities. I contacted my supervisor and requested backup before confronting Jessica. This kind of manipulation case required careful handling to prevent escalation. We needed to gather more evidence and coordinate with the hospital administration. But as I was wrapping up the initial report, Sarah's phone rang. It was Jessica, calling to check on her friend and see if the police visit had gone well. Answer it, I instructed. Act normal. Don't let on that we suspect anything. Sarah took the call, and I could hear Jessica's voice clearly. She was asking detailed questions about what the police had said, whether they'd found any evidence, and if they thought the stalker might escalate. She also mentioned that she'd noticed Sarah's patrol car in the driveway and had been worried sick about what might have happened. After Sarah hung up, I realized we had a problem. Jessica had been monitoring the house and knew about my visit. This case was about to get more complicated. We need to move quickly, I told Sarah. Change your locks today, don't give Jessica the new keys, and document everything. I'm going to start building a case for stalking and harassment charges, but I need you to be very careful. Don't confront her directly, and don't let on that you suspect anything until we have everything in place. What I didn't tell Sarah was that I'd seen cases like this escalate rapidly when the perpetrator realizes they're being investigated. Jessica had invested months in this psychological manipulation campaign, and if she felt cornered, there was no telling how far she might go to protect herself. As I drove away from Maple Avenue that afternoon, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The level of planning and manipulation Jessica had demonstrated wasn't the work of someone who would give up easily. In my experience, people who engage in this kind of systematic psychological abuse don't stop when they're caught. They adapt and escalate. I had no idea that 3 days later, I'd be responding to another call that would reveal just how deep Jessica's obsession really went, and how far she was willing to go to destroy the friend who had gotten everything she wanted. What's the most manipulative behavior you've witnessed from someone you trusted? Have you ever realized that a friend or coworker was secretly working against you while pretending to support you? The psychology behind fake friendship can be more dangerous than obvious enemies. Share your experiences in the comments below. I've been working with the Bakersfield Police Department for 8 years, and I thought I'd responded to every kind of trespassing and voyeurism case you could imagine. Peeping Toms, illegal surveillance, break-ins, they're unfortunately common in apartment complexes. But what I discovered on July 27, 2023, during what started as a routine maintenance complaint at Westfield Garden Apartments, revealed a level of systematic invasion of privacy that still makes my skin crawl. What we found living beneath that building changed how I think about the hidden spaces in our cities, and connected to something much larger than any of us could have anticipated. The call came in around 10:15 p.m. on a Thursday night. I was finishing up paperwork in my 2019 Chevrolet Tahoe when dispatch contacted me. Unit 14, we need you at 1247 Industrial Boulevard. Multiple residents reporting strange noises from the basement area and concerns about someone accessing the utility tunnels. Westfield Garden Apartments was a 4-story brick building built in the 1970s, home to about 60 families. The kind of place where young professionals and small families rented affordable 2-bedroom units. As I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed several residents standing in small groups near the building entrance, talking in hushed voices and looking nervous. Whatever was happening had clearly spooked multiple people. The building superintendent, Robert Thompson, met me in the lobby. He was clearly agitated, running his hands through his graying hair and checking his watch repeatedly. Thompson had been managing this property for 15 years and had the weathered look of someone who dealt with every kind of tenant issue imaginable. "Officer Williams, thank God you're here," he said, his voice tight with stress. "We've been getting complaints for weeks about sounds coming from the basement, scratching, tapping, sometimes what sounds like someone moving around down there. At first I thought it was just old buildings settling or maybe rats, but it's gotten worse. Much worse." As we talked, Mrs. Chen from Unit 3B approached us. She was holding her 6-year-old son's hand and looked exhausted. "Officer, I haven't slept properly in a week. Last night around midnight, I heard what sounded like someone tapping on the walls inside my bedroom. My son heard it too. We've been staying at my sister's place, but I can't keep doing that. More residents began gathering, each with similar stories. Strange sounds at night, the feeling of being watched, small items going missing from their apartments. The Kovac family from Unit 2A mentioned finding muddy footprints in their hallway that didn't match any of their shoes. The elderly Mr. Patterson from Unit 1C had discovered that someone had been going through his mail, leaving it slightly disturbed in ways only he would notice. "I've been down to check the utility areas multiple times," Thompson continued as we headed toward the basement. "But I keep finding things that shouldn't be there. Tools that aren't mine, food containers, personal items. And these holes that definitely weren't there before." He led me down to the basement through a service entrance behind the building's laundry room. The basement was a maze of utility corridors, storage areas, and access tunnels for the building's electrical, plumbing, and heating systems. The air was thick with humidity, and had an unpleasant musty smell that seemed stronger in certain areas. As we walked deeper into the basement, I noticed the smell had an organic quality, like someone had been living down there. "The holes started appearing about 2 months ago," Thompson explained, pointing to several small openings drilled through the concrete walls at various heights. "These weren't here when I did my last full inspection 6 months ago. They've been drilled from this side, going up into the building. Look at this." I examined the holes more closely with my flashlight. They were about the size of a quarter, drilled at precise angles, and when I shined my light through them, I could see up into what appeared to be apartment units above. The holes were positioned strategically. Some provided views into bedrooms, others into living rooms or kitchens. Someone had spent considerable time and effort creating a network of observation points throughout the basement. "Have you contacted the city about access to the main sewer tunnels?" I asked. "That's where it gets really strange," Thompson replied, leading me deeper into the basement. "The city says they haven't had any authorized work in this area for months. But last week I found this." We reached a section of the basement where a heavy maintenance cover had been removed from what appeared to be a main sewer access point. The cover, which had to weigh at least 150 pounds, was leaning against the wall. Below, I could see a tunnel system that connected to the city's underground infrastructure. "I replaced the cover and secured it with a padlock," Thompson said. "But 2 days later the lock had been cut and the cover was moved again. That's when residents started complaining about more noises and strange smells coming up through their drains. I called for backup and contacted our department's specialized unit that handles underground city infrastructure. While waiting for additional support, Thompson and I continued examining the basement. What we found was far more disturbing than simple trespassing. Someone had created a comprehensive surveillance network throughout the building. The drilled holes were positioned to observe multiple apartments, with some providing views into bedrooms, bathrooms, and living areas. Near each observation point, we found small notebooks containing handwritten logs in neat, precise handwriting. The notebooks documented the daily routines of specific residents in meticulous detail. Unit 3B Lisa Chen leaves for work 7:45 a.m. every weekday, drives 2017 blue Honda Civic, returns 6:30 p.m., picks up son from daycare Tuesdays and Thursdays, showers at 8 p.m., watches Korean dramas until 11 p.m., son afraid of dark, leaves hallway light on. Unit 2A Kovac family dinner 6 p.m. sharp every night, children Michael, age 9, and Sarah, age 7, in bed by 9 p.m., parents argue about finances most Tuesday evenings after children asleep, mother works late Wednesdays, father leaves early Thursday mornings for business trips. The level of detail was staggering and deeply invasive. The person keeping these logs knew intimate details about dozens of families, their schedules, their relationships, their private conversations, their personal habits, even their fears and secrets. Some entries included diagrams showing furniture placement and daily movement patterns within each apartment. Officer Martinez arrived as backup, and we decided to investigate the sewer access point. Using proper safety equipment and maintaining radio contact with dispatch, we descended into the tunnel system below the building. The smell that had been noticeable in the basement became overwhelming as we climbed down. The main sewer tunnel was larger than I expected, about 6 feet high and 4 feet wide, with walkways on both sides of the central water channel. The tunnel was old, probably dating back to the building's original construction, with brick walls that had been painted and repainted over the decades. But what we found about 50 feet from the access point made both of us stop in our tracks. Someone had created an elaborate living space in a large alcove off the main tunnel. It wasn't just a homeless encampment. This was a carefully organized living situation that had clearly been established over months, possibly years. The alcove had been furnished with salvaged but functional furniture, a desk, chair, filing cabinet, bookshelf, and what appeared to be a bed made from wooden pallets and multiple sleeping bags. Battery-powered LED lights were strung throughout the space, providing surprisingly good illumination. A camping stove sat on a makeshift counter, surrounded by canned goods, bottled water, and other supplies that would allow someone to live independently for extended periods. Clothes were hung on lines strung between metal supports, and there were several pairs of boots and shoes arranged near the entrance. But it was the walls that truly shocked us. They were covered with hundreds of photographs, all taken through the observation holes in the building above. Photos of families eating dinner, children playing, couples watching television, people in various states of undress. The images were organized by apartment unit and labeled with names, dates, and personal details about each resident. "Jesus Christ," Martinez whispered, playing his flashlight across the display. "How long has this been going on?" I was examining a large wall calendar where someone had marked specific dates and times in different colored pens, corresponding to when residents would be away from their apartments or engaged in particular activities. Red marks indicated when apartments would be empty. Blue marks showed when children would be alone or when parents would be distracted. Green marks noted when residents typically showered or changed clothes. This wasn't random voyeurism. It was systematic stalking of an entire building's worth of people, with the precision and organization of someone conducting a long-term research project. We found personal items that had clearly been stolen from apartments during the times when the calendar indicated residents would be away. Jewelry, photographs, clothing, personal documents, children's toys, even prescription medications. Some items were arranged in what appeared to be shrine-like displays, organized by which resident they belonged to. A filing cabinet contained folders for each apartment unit, filled with detailed information about the residents. Driver's license numbers, work schedules, bank statements, medical records, school information for children, relationship details, family conflicts, financial problems. Someone had been systematically gathering intelligence on every person in the building. The most disturbing discovery was a series of detailed floor plans for each apartment unit, showing furniture placement, daily activity patterns, security vulnerabilities, hide spare keys, and optimal entry points. Someone had been using their access to the building's infrastructure to map out every unit in preparation for what appeared to be planned intrusions. That's when we heard footsteps echoing from deeper in the tunnel system. Martinez and I immediately radioed for additional backup and began moving toward the sound. The tunnel system was more extensive than we'd realized, connecting not just to our building but to several blocks of the surrounding neighborhood. Our suspect had access to an underground network that could allow movement throughout a significant portion of the city without ever being seen above ground. We followed the sound for about 200 yards, our footsteps echoing in the confined space. The tunnels were darker here, and our flashlights created dancing shadows that made it difficult to see clearly. The sound of our pursuit seemed to echo ahead of us, and whoever we were following clearly knew these tunnels much better than we did. We came to another alcove, this one containing what appeared to be a surveillance command center. Multiple battery-powered monitors showed live feeds from various locations. Some of the feeds were clearly from inside the apartment building we'd just left. I could see Mrs. Chin putting her son to bed, the Kovac family watching television, Mr. Patterson reading in his chair. But others appeared to be from different buildings entirely. A desk held recording equipment, external hard drives, and notebooks filled with observation schedules for multiple locations. Someone had been conducting surveillance operations on several buildings simultaneously, documenting the lives of hundreds of people across the city. "Unit 14 to dispatch," I radioed. We need the tunnel specialist team down here immediately, and contact the city utilities department. This operation is much larger than a single building. We're looking at a surveillance network that could affect multiple neighborhoods. As we continued deeper into the tunnel system, we found evidence that our suspect had been living underground for months, possibly longer. There were multiple living areas set up at different locations, each with supplies and surveillance equipment focused on different buildings or neighborhoods. Food supplies, fresh water, sleeping areas, even a portable toilet system that connected to the main sewer line. The footsteps we'd been following led to a junction where several tunnels met. Fresh footprints in the mud showed that someone had recently passed through, but the trail split in multiple directions. Our suspect knew these tunnels better than we did and had multiple escape routes planned. Maps posted on the tunnel walls showed the entire underground network, with different colored routes marked for accessing different buildings. We decided to return to the surface and coordinate a larger operation. This wasn't something 2 officers could handle alone, and we needed specialized equipment to safely navigate the extensive tunnel system. As we made our way back, I noticed additional details that had escaped our attention earlier. Tool marks on the tunnel walls showed where our suspect had enlarged certain passages. Extension cords ran along the walls, suggesting a more permanent electrical setup than just battery power. Back at the apartment building, we began the process of notifying residents about the security breach. The conversation with the first family we contacted, the Johnsons in Unit 2A, revealed the true scope of the violation these families had experienced. "You mean someone's been watching us for months?" Mrs. Johnson asked, holding her 8-year-old daughter closer while her husband examined the photographs we'd found. "They know our schedules, our routines, everything about our private lives." Mr. Johnson was studying one particular photo that showed their family during what they thought was a private moment. "This picture was taken last Tuesday during our family movie night. You can see our daughter in her pajamas, our son doing homework at the kitchen table. This person has been documenting our children without us knowing." The psychological impact on the families was immediate and severe. Parents were terrified about what this person might have planned, whether their children were safe, and how long this violation of their privacy had been going on. Several families packed bags that night and left to stay with relatives, unable to feel safe in their own homes. As we worked through the night interviewing residents and documenting evidence, a disturbing pattern emerged. Several families reported items going missing over the past few months, small things they'd attributed to misplacement, or family members borrowing them. Others mentioned feeling like they were being watched, especially in the evenings, but had dismissed it as paranoia. Mrs. Rodriguez from Unit 4A had been having nightmares about someone in her bedroom, but had attributed them to stress from her divorce proceedings. The Peterson family had noticed that their 6-year-old son had become afraid to sleep alone, claiming he heard the man in the walls talking at night. They'd scheduled him for counseling, thinking he was having adjustment issues from starting school. The building's security system showed no signs of unauthorized entry through normal access points, which explained why no one had suspected an internal threat. Our suspect had been using the building's own infrastructure against its residents, accessing apartments through utility spaces, bathroom vents, and maintenance areas that residents would never think to secure. By dawn, we had teams from multiple departments involved: major crimes, the city engineering department, specialized units trained for underground operations, and the FBI's cybercrime division to handle the electronic surveillance equipment. The tunnel system was more extensive than anyone had realized, and our suspect had disappeared into a network that could connect him to dozens of buildings throughout the city. What I couldn't shake was the level of planning and patience this had required. Someone had spent months, possibly years, developing this system of surveillance and creating detailed profiles of innocent families. The photographs and logs showed an obsession with controlling and documenting other people's lives that went far beyond typical voyeurism. This was organized stalking on a massive scale. The technical analysis of the surveillance equipment revealed that our suspect had been selling some of the recorded material online, turning his voyeurism into a profitable criminal enterprise. Bank records we later obtained showed regular deposits that corresponded with the uploading of new surveillance videos to illegal websites. As I filed my initial report that morning, I realized this case was far from over. Somewhere in the tunnels beneath our city, someone was still out there with intimate knowledge of dozens of families and the ability to access their homes whenever he wanted. The scope of his operation suggested this wasn't impulsive behavior. This was someone with technical skills, patience, and a complete disregard for other people's privacy and safety. I had no idea that my colleague Detective Rodriguez was already investigating a series of break-ins across town that would prove our underground observer had been much busier than we'd initially realized, and that this surveillance network was just the beginning of something far more sinister. Have you ever felt like you were being watched in your own home? What would you do if you discovered someone had been secretly documenting your family's daily routine for months? The idea that someone could be living beneath our feet, watching our most private moments, is a nightmare most of us never consider. Share your thoughts about privacy and security in apartment living below. I've been working major crimes with the Santa Rosa Police Department for 14 years, and I thought I understood the depths of family dysfunction and criminal behavior. Child abuse cases, parental neglect, exploitation. Unfortunately, I've seen it all. But what I uncovered on November 12, 2023, during what began as a routine truancy investigation, revealed a level of systematic criminal manipulation involving children that shook me to my core. What started as a simple welfare check on a supposedly sick child exposed a family operation that had been victimizing an entire neighborhood for over 2 years. The initial call came from Jefferson Elementary School around 11:30 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. I was patrolling the Hillcrest neighborhood in my 2021 Ford Taurus Police Interceptor when dispatch contacted me. Unit 19, we need you to conduct a welfare check at 529 Cedar Lane. School reports that student Marcus Davidson has been absent for 3 consecutive days without proper documentation, and previous attempts to contact the family have been unsuccessful. Cedar Lane was a quiet residential street in an established neighborhood where families had lived for decades. Well-maintained single-family homes with large yards, the kind of area where neighbors knew each other and children played safely in the streets. As I pulled up to the Davidson house, I noticed it was one of the smaller homes on the block, a modest 2-story structure that looked like it needed some maintenance work. The house appeared empty when I first knocked. No answer at the front door, no sounds from inside, and the garage door was closed. I was about to leave when I noticed movement in an upstairs window, just a brief glimpse of someone pulling curtains closed. Someone was definitely home. I knocked again, more persistently this time, and eventually heard footsteps approaching the door. The woman who answered was Patricia Davidson, 34, who worked part-time at a local grocery store. She looked nervous and was clearly trying to block my view into the house. "Mrs. Davidson? I'm Officer Chin with Santa Rosa PD. We've received a report from Jefferson Elementary that Marcus has been absent for several days. The school is concerned about his welfare." "Oh, Marcus is sick," she said quickly. "He has the flu. I've been taking care of him. I meant to call the school, but I've been so busy." "I understand. As part of our welfare check, I need to see Marcus to verify he's okay. It's standard procedure." Patricia hesitated, glancing back into the house. "He's sleeping right now. The fever broke this morning and he's finally getting some rest. Could you come back later? I'm sorry, but I need to complete the welfare check now. It will only take a moment." Reluctantly, Patricia led me inside. The house was tidy but showed signs of unusual activity. There were muddy shoes by the door that looked too large for a child, and I noticed what appeared to be 2 different sets of children's clothing scattered around, some clean, some dirty, as if 2 different kids had been getting dressed in the same space. "Marcus is upstairs," Patricia said, leading me toward the staircase. "He's been in bed for 3 days." As we climbed the stairs, I heard what sounded like whispering from one of the bedrooms, but when we reached the landing, the house was quiet. Patricia knocked on a bedroom door and called out, "Marcus, honey, there's a police officer here who needs to see you." The boy who appeared in the doorway looked to be about 8 years old, with dark hair and pale skin that could indicate recent illness. He was wearing pajamas and had the drowsy look of someone who had just woken up. "Hi, Marcus," I said. "I'm Officer Chin. Your school was worried about you. How are you feeling?" "Better," he said quietly, not making eye contact. "My stomach was hurting." "That's good. Your mom says you've had the flu?" The boy glanced at his mother, then nodded. "Yeah, the flu." Something felt off about the interaction. The child seemed coached, and his responses were too rehearsed. I also noticed that his sick appearance looked more like he'd been kept indoors rather than actually ill, pale from lack of sunlight rather than fever. "Mrs. Davidson, do you have any other children?" I asked. "No, just Marcus." But as I looked around the bedroom, I saw evidence that suggested otherwise. 2 beds, both with rumpled sheets. 2 sets of clothes laid out. 2 backpacks, though one was partially hidden under the bed. "Marcus, is this your room?" He nodded, but his eyes kept darting to the closet door, which was slightly ajar. "Mind if I look around a bit more?" I asked Patricia. "Sometimes when kids are sick for several days, we like to make sure the home environment is safe and healthy." She was clearly uncomfortable but couldn't refuse without raising more suspicion. As I examined the room more closely, I found additional evidence of 2 children, 2 toothbrushes in the bathroom, 2 sets of homework assignments on the desk, and 2 different sizes of the same shoes in the closet. That's when I heard a sound from what I thought was an empty bedroom across the hall, a muffled cough. "Is someone else in the house?" I asked. "No," Patricia said quickly. "Maybe the neighbor's radio." But the sound had definitely come from inside the house. I walked across the hall and knocked on the closed bedroom door. "Hello? Is anyone in there?" Silence. I tried the door handle. It was locked from the inside. "Mrs. Davidson, I need you to open this door." I don't have the key. Marcus must have locked it while playing. Marcus is right here with us." "Who's in that room?" At this point, Patricia's story was falling apart. I radioed for backup and insisted she open the door. After several minutes of resistance, she finally produced the key. Inside the room was another boy, identical to Marcus, trying to hide under the bed. He was wearing regular clothes, not pajamas, and looked like he'd been awake and active. "What's your name?" I asked the second boy. He looked terrified and didn't answer. "Mrs. Davidson, I need an explanation. Who is this child?" Patricia finally broke down. That's Marcus's twin brother Michael. They're both mine. Why didn't you tell me you had 2 children? And why is one hiding while the other is supposedly sick?" What Patricia revealed next was one of the most disturbing cases of child exploitation I'd encountered. For over 2 years, the Davidson family had been using the fact that Marcus and Michael were identical twins to commit crimes in their neighborhood. The scheme worked like this: the twins would alternate attending school. While one was in class establishing an alibi, the other would be sent to burglarize neighbors' homes. The twin at school would be seen by teachers and classmates, providing perfect cover for his brother's criminal activities. When Marcus was reported absent, it was actually Michael who was home, and the real Marcus was out committing crimes. "We needed the money," Patricia said, tears streaming down her face. "My husband lost his job last year, and we were going to lose the house. The boys are so small, they could get into places adults couldn't. Windows, pet doors, basement access. And nobody would suspect children." The level of planning was sophisticated. The twins had been trained to study their neighbors' routines, identify when houses would be empty, and target specific high-value items that could be easily sold. They knew which families had expensive electronics, jewelry, or cash hidden in their homes. "How did they know what to look for?" I asked. "They would visit neighbors under the pretense of selling school fundraising items or asking for help with homework. People would invite them in, show them around, and the boys would memorize the layout and identify valuable items." The neighborhood had experienced a string of break-ins over the past 2 years, but nobody had suspected children. The burglaries were too sophisticated, too well planned. Neighbors had installed security systems, changed locks, and suspected each other of the crimes. I called for additional units and social services. This was now a major criminal case involving child endangerment, burglary, and fraud. The twins needed immediate protection, and we needed to investigate the full scope of their criminal activities. As we waited for backup, I continued interviewing the family. The father, David Davidson, worked construction but had been unemployed for months. Rather than seek legitimate assistance, the family had decided to exploit their children's unique situation as identical twins. "The boys are smart," Patricia said. "They figured out they could fool their teachers by switching places. At first, it was just for fun. Marcus would take a test for Michael, or Michael would go to Marcus's parent conference. But then we realized we could use it for other things." The twins had been trained to lie about their identities, memorize each other's daily activities, and maintain the illusion that only one child existed in most social situations. Teachers, neighbors, and even some relatives believed the Davidsons had only one son. "What about school records, medical records, official documents?" I asked. "We only registered Marcus for school. Michael has never been officially enrolled anywhere. We've been homeschooling him, but really just teaching him how to help with the burglaries." This meant that Michael had been deprived of formal education, social interaction with other children, and proper medical care. He existed in a shadow world where his only purpose was to commit crimes while his brother provided alibis. Detective Williams arrived with social services, and we began the process of separating the twins to interview them individually. The psychological impact of this exploitation was immediately apparent. Both boys were terrified of authority figures, conditioned to lie about their identities, and had been taught that their criminal activities were necessary for their family's survival. Marcus, the official twin who attended school, was better socialized but carried enormous guilt about his brother's situation. Michael, the hidden twin, had severe anxiety and had been essentially imprisoned in his own home for most of his life. "We started with small things," Marcus told Detective Williams. "Mom would send Michael to ask neighbors if he could use their bathroom while I was at school. He'd unlock windows or doors from the inside. Then we'd come back later when nobody was home." The sophistication of their operation became clear as we investigated further. The twins had mapped out the entire neighborhood, documenting which houses had security systems, which families had valuable items, and which residents had predictable schedules that made them easy targets. "Michael would go to Mrs. Peterson's house and ask to use her phone to call his mom," Marcus explained. "While he was inside, he'd see where she kept her jewelry box and notice if any windows were unlocked. Then when she was at work, he'd go back and take things." The psychological manipulation was devastating. These children had been taught that their criminal activities were normal, necessary, and even heroic because they were helping their family survive. They had no understanding that they were victims of abuse and exploitation. As the investigation expanded, we discovered that the Davidson operation had been responsible for over 30 burglaries in the neighborhood. Items stolen included jewelry, electronics, cash, credit cards, and personal documents that could be used for identity theft. The neighborhood impact was severe. Families had been living in fear, suspecting each other, and spending thousands of dollars on security systems that couldn't prevent crimes committed by children who were invited into their homes. Mrs. Peterson, the elderly woman who lived 2 houses down, was devastated when she learned the truth. "That sweet little boy came to my door at least a dozen times over the past year," she said. "He was always so polite, asking to use my phone or bathroom. I thought his parents were neglectful, so I'd give him snacks and let him stay warm in my house. I never imagined he was studying my home to rob me later." The twins were removed from their parents' custody and placed with social services. Both needed extensive therapy to understand that they had been victims, not criminals. The psychological damage from years of exploitation, isolation, and forced criminality would take years to address. David and Patricia Davidson were charged with multiple felonies including child endangerment, burglary, fraud, and conspiracy. The case drew attention from child advocacy groups who highlighted how identical twins could be exploited in ways that single children couldn't be. What haunted me most was the realization that this scheme had been going on for over 2 years right under everyone's noses. Teachers, neighbors, and even extended family members had been completely fooled by the twin switch operation. The case also revealed gaps in our systems designed to protect children. Michael had never been officially registered anywhere. No school records, no medical records, no social services contact. He had existed in a bureaucratic blind spot that allowed his exploitation to continue unchecked. As I wrote my report that evening, I couldn't stop thinking about the psychological conditioning these children had endured. They had been taught to lie as naturally as breathing, to view their neighbors as targets rather than community members, and to believe that their criminal activities were acts of love for their family. But what I discovered the next week was that the Davidson case was connected to a larger network of families using similar schemes across multiple school districts. This wasn't an isolated incident, it was part of a coordinated effort to exploit children in ways that law enforcement had never anticipated. Have you ever wondered if you really know your neighbor's children? How would you feel if you discovered that a child you'd been kind to was actually casing your home for burglary? The idea that identical twins could be used to create perfect alibis while committing crimes is terrifying. What other creative criminal schemes might be hiding in plain sight in our communities? I've been working with the Concord Police Department for 16 years, and I thought I'd seen every type of scam artist and con game imaginable. Insurance fraud, identity theft, elaborate Ponzi schemes. Criminals will exploit any vulnerability they can find. But what I uncovered on February 24, 2024, during what started as a routine fraud investigation, revealed a criminal operation so audacious and psychologically damaging that it still gives me chills. What began as complaints about a fake psychic turned into the discovery of someone who had been literally living inside people's homes, terrorizing families while systematically robbing them blind. The call came in around 9:45 a.m. on a Saturday morning. I was reviewing case files in my 2022 Dodge Charger when dispatch contacted me. Unit 7, we need you at 1634 Birchway. Homeowner reporting ongoing fraud involving supernatural claims and requesting investigation into possible elder abuse. Birchway was located in Pine Ridge, an upscale neighborhood where retired professionals and wealthy families own large, older homes with extensive architectural features. The kind of houses built in the 1920s and 1930s with multiple stories, complex rooflines, and plenty of hidden spaces that modern homes lacked. The complainant was Eleanor Whitman, a 72-year-old retired librarian who lived alone in a massive Victorian house she'd inherited from her parents. When I arrived, Mrs. Whitman was clearly distressed but trying to maintain her composure. She invited me into her living room, which was elegantly furnished with antiques and family heirlooms. "Officer Rodriguez, thank you for coming," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I know this is going to sound ridiculous, but I believe I'm being swindled by someone claiming to be a ghost." She explained that about 8 months earlier, she had begun experiencing strange phenomena in her house. Objects would move overnight, lights would flicker, and she would hear footsteps in the attic during the early morning hours. Initially, she had dismissed these events as normal occurrences in an old house. But then I started finding notes. She continued, showing me several handwritten messages. They appeared in different places around the house, on my kitchen table, tucked into books, even placed on my pillow while I slept. The notes were written in an elaborate, old-fashioned script and claimed to be from the spirit of Thomas Whitman, Eleanor's grandfather, who had died in the house in 1963. The messages expressed concern for Eleanor's well-being, offered guidance about her life decisions, and gradually began requesting that she make specific purchases and donations to help ease his spiritual suffering. At first, the requests were small, Eleanor explained. He asked me to buy certain flowers for the garden, specific books about spiritualism, candles and incense for spiritual cleansing. It seemed harmless, even comforting. I thought perhaps my grandfather's spirit was actually trying to communicate with me. But over time, the requests had escalated dramatically. The ghost had convinced Eleanor to withdraw large sums of cash to donate to various charities, purchase expensive spiritual artifacts, and even renovate parts of her house to create a spiritual sanctuary in the attic. She had spent over $47,000 in 8 months following the ghost's instructions. "What made you suspect fraud?" I asked. "Several things," she replied. "First, my grandfather never called me Ellie. That was my sister's nickname, and he always called me Eleanor. Second, some of the historical details in the notes were wrong. The ghost claimed to remember events that happened after my grandfather died. And finally, I noticed that items were disappearing from my house around the same time the notes would appear." Eleanor had kept meticulous records of her interactions with the supposed spirit, including photographs of notes, receipts for purchases, and a diary documenting each supernatural occurrence. Her documentation revealed a pattern that was clearly criminal rather than paranormal. "The final straw was last Tuesday," she continued. "I came home from grocery shopping and found that my mother's jewelry box had been moved from my bedroom to the living room. But when I checked the contents, several valuable pieces were missing. That's when I realized someone was physically entering my house." I examined the house's security features with Eleanor. All doors and windows were properly locked, and there were no signs of forced entry. The security system showed no record of anyone entering or leaving the house during the times when the supernatural events occurred. "Mrs. Whitman, I need to ask you some specific questions about the layout of your house. Are there any areas you don't access regularly?" "Well, the attic is quite large, but I rarely go up there. It's mostly storage for old furniture and family items." The previous owner also mentioned that there were some hidden spaces in the house, servants' quarters from when the house was built, and storage areas behind the walls. "When was the last time you were in the attic?" "Months ago, maybe longer. The ladder is heavy and difficult for me to manage alone." I requested backup and asked Eleanor to show me how to access the attic. The entrance was through a pull-down ladder in the hallway ceiling. As we prepared to investigate, I noticed something that had escaped Eleanor's attention: fresh scuff marks on the hallway walls around the attic access, suggesting recent and regular use. Officer Martinez arrived as backup, and we decided to investigate the attic space. What we found up there was shocking and immediately explained the months of supernatural harassment Eleanor had endured. Someone had been living in her attic. The space had been converted into a functional living area, complete with a sleeping bag, battery-powered lights, a camping stove, and months' worth of food and water supplies. Clothes were hung on makeshift lines, and there was even a portable toilet system connected to the house's plumbing through an access panel. But it was the surveillance setup that truly revealed the scope of this operation. The intruder had drilled small holes through the floor at strategic locations, providing views into Eleanor's bedroom, living room, kitchen, and bathroom. A network of small cameras and microphones allowed complete monitoring of her daily activities. "Jesus," Martinez whispered as we examined the equipment. "This guy has been watching her every move for months." The living space also contained Eleanor's missing jewelry, cash, family photographs, and personal documents. But more disturbing was what appeared to be a detailed psychological profile of Eleanor, including information about her family history, her daily routines, her fears and anxieties, and her emotional vulnerabilities. A notebook contained scripts for the ghost communications, showing how the intruder had researched Eleanor's family history and crafted messages designed to manipulate her emotions and extract money. The handwriting matched the spiritual notes she had been receiving. "This is incredibly sophisticated," I said, photographing the evidence. "Whoever's doing this has been studying Mrs. Whitman for months, learning everything about her life to make the ghost story believable." We found receipts and bank statements showing that the intruder had been using Eleanor's personal information to open credit accounts in her name and make online purchases that were delivered to different addresses. The ghost scam was just one part of a larger identity theft operation. That's when we heard sounds from below. Someone was in the house. Martinez and I quietly moved to the attic access and listened. We could hear footsteps moving through the house, and Eleanor's voice calling out, "Thomas? Is that you? I'm back from the store." Someone had entered the house while we were in the attic, and Eleanor had returned from an errand. We were dealing with an active break-in situation, but the intruder might not realize we were there. I radioed for additional backup while Martinez and I prepared to descend. The situation was dangerous. If our suspect was armed or felt cornered, Eleanor could be in serious jeopardy. We quietly climbed down from the attic and moved through the house toward the voices. In the living room, we found Eleanor talking to a man in his mid-30s who was dressed in dark clothing and carrying what appeared to be another handwritten note. "Freeze! Police!" I shouted, drawing my weapon. The man immediately dropped the note and raised his hands. He was Marcus Wright, 34, unemployed, with a previous record for burglary and fraud. He had been living in Eleanor's attic for over 8 months, essentially making her house his base of operations for multiple criminal schemes. "Mrs. Whitman, are you okay?" Martinez asked while I cuffed the suspect. "I don't understand," she said, looking confused and frightened. Is this the ghost?" The psychological impact on Eleanor was immediate and devastating. For 8 months she had believed she was communicating with her deceased grandfather, finding comfort in what she thought was a spiritual connection. Learning that she had been manipulated by a criminal living in her own house was traumatic beyond words. As we processed the crime scene, the full scope of Wright's operation became clear. He had been targeting elderly homeowners in large, older houses throughout the Pine Ridge neighborhood. He would study potential victims for weeks, learning their routines and identifying houses with accessible attic spaces. Wright would break in while homeowners were away, establish a living space in the attic, and begin his psychological manipulation campaign. He specialized in elderly victims who lived alone and might be vulnerable to claims of supernatural contact with deceased family members. "How did you choose your victims?" I asked during the interrogation. "I'd watch houses for patterns," Wright admitted. "Single elderly people, big old houses with attics, people who seemed lonely or isolated. I'd research their family histories through obituaries and social media, then create convincing ghost stories." Wright had been simultaneously operating this scam on 3 different homeowners in the neighborhood. Eleanor was his most successful victim, but he had also been manipulating Harold Peterson 2 streets over and Margaret Thompson on the other side of the neighborhood. The financial damage was extensive. Wright had stolen over $75,000 from his 3 victims through direct theft, fraudulent purchases, and the ghost manipulation scheme. He had also used their personal information to open credit accounts and make purchases that would eventually damage their credit ratings. The ghost angle was brilliant, Wright explained with disturbing pride. "People want to believe in life after death, especially when they're lonely. Once I convinced them they were communicating with a dead relative, they'd do almost anything I asked. They thought they were helping their loved one find peace." The psychological manipulation was particularly cruel. Wright had studied his victims' family histories and personal relationships, then exploited their grief and loneliness to extract money and compliance. The elderly victims had found comfort in what they believed was spiritual contact, making the betrayal even more devastating. We coordinated with social services to provide counseling support for the victims. The psychological damage from months of manipulation and the violation of their homes would require extensive therapy. Several victims reported feeling unsafe in their own houses and had difficulty trusting their own perceptions after being so thoroughly deceived. The neighborhood impact was also significant. Residents of Pine Ridge had been experiencing similar unexplained phenomena in their homes, but had been reluctant to report supernatural claims to police. Wright's arrest revealed that at least 6 other homeowners had been experiencing strange events that they now realized were likely criminal rather than paranormal. "I kept hearing footsteps in my attic," said Robert Hayes, who lived 3 blocks from Eleanor. "I thought it was just the house settling, but now I'm wondering if someone's been living up there too." We conducted security checks on several other houses in the neighborhood and found evidence of attempted break-ins and surveillance at multiple locations. Wright had been expanding his operation and had identified several additional potential victims. The case also revealed security vulnerabilities in older homes that many residents had never considered. Large attics, complex roof lines, multiple access points, and architectural features that created hidden spaces made these houses particularly vulnerable to this type of crime. Wright was charged with multiple felonies including burglary, fraud, identity theft, stalking, and elder abuse. The case drew attention from law enforcement agencies in other cities who had been investigating similar ghost-related scams targeting elderly homeowners. What disturbed me most was the calculated cruelty of Wright's approach. He had deliberately exploited his victims' grief, loneliness, and spiritual beliefs to commit his crimes. The psychological damage was as significant as the financial theft, and the violation of their home's safety was profound. The case connected back to our other investigations in ways we hadn't initially realized. Wright had been using information gathered from his attic surveillance to coordinate with other criminals we'd been tracking, sharing intelligence about his victims' schedules, security systems, and valuable possessions. The underground surveillance network we'd discovered at Westfield Garden Apartments had been purchasing Wright's intelligence about Pine Ridge residents. The twin burglary operation had been using Wright's information to identify potential targets in different neighborhoods. And the stalking case involving Jessica Chin had been part of a larger pattern of criminals sharing psychological manipulation techniques. As I completed my final report on the Wright case, I realized we had uncovered a sophisticated criminal network that had been operating throughout our city for years. Each individual case had seemed unrelated, but they were all connected by shared information, coordinated timing, and similar psychological manipulation tactics. The most chilling aspect was how Wright had turned his victims' own homes against them. These families had felt safe and secure in their houses, never realizing that their most private moments were being observed and their personal vulnerabilities were being catalogued by someone living just feet above their heads. Have you ever heard unexplained sounds in your attic or found items moved in your house? How well do you know the hidden spaces in your own home? The idea that someone could be living in your attic, watching your daily routine and manipulating your emotions while robbing you blind, is a nightmare that's more possible than most people realize, especially in older homes with complex architecture and large, accessible attic spaces. Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.